Welcome to the Power of ERDC podcast. I am your host, Tim Reeves. Today's military command and control units require an unprecedented amount of power in the field, pushing traditional fuel resupply lines to their logistical limits and putting warfighter lives at risk. For the Department of War, developing alternative power sources is about achieving mission success, reducing the risk to our warfighters, and finding significant cost savings. At ERDC, extensive and ongoing research in operational energy technologies, conducted alongside key industry partners, is accelerating the delivery of rugged energy systems, ensuring our military can operate and dominate in any environment. Joining us to discuss this work is Dr. Jess Lyons, a research scientist working with the operational energy team at ERDC's Construction Engineering Research Laboratory. Dr. Lyons, welcome.
Thank you for having me.
Good deal. Now, for the audience to know, you are like hours back from a TDY in Key West. Have you unpacked or have you gone through all your emails yet?
Well, this is a first for me. I've not only unpacked, but I've actually done all of my laundry. This efficiency will never be seen again.
Well, this podcast is not
and I am on top of my emails.
Well, now this is a podcast not for people to come to brag, but thank you very much. So when we talk about operational energy today, what does the power demand for a modern command and control unit look like out in the field compared to what people might expect?
Sure. So a command and control unit involves a command operations center, which is what we're usually integrating with directly. And the power demand for a COC can really dramatically vary dependent on the location, the unit, and what the mission might be. And then on top of that, within the mission itself, there can be a high variance of demand or just change in general. And of course, as we all know, missions can also change, sometimes very suddenly. And with that in mind, that's typically why the DoW tends to oversize its generators. We're often planning for the worst case scenario, right? For us, what we do is we use metering and monitoring to assess what the power demand is going to be. And then we use hybrid systems. In the case of the project that I'm currently working on, in particular, photovoltaic to support, to eliminate problems like generator wet stacking, and overall try and customize the power supply to the need as closely as possible.
So there's a misconception, I think, viewing renewable energy strictly through an environmental lens. But for the military, the stakes are much higher. What are the real logistical, financial, and even human costs of relying on traditional fuel resupply runs?
Sure. This is a really important issue for us in the operational energy field. So from a logistics perspective, we saw in Afghanistan and in Iraq, about 50% of the casualties that we experienced were from resupply runs. In Afghanistan, it was 1 in every 24. And then in Iraq, it was 1 casualty for every 39 runs. So for us, if we can reduce the logistical burden by reducing the refueling need, then that could directly translate to lives saved. And from a logistical perspective and a financial perspective, so the fully burdened cost of fuel for OEF and OIF was 1 to 4. And then in AORs like AFRICOM or in the Arctic, you're looking at something closer to 10 to 1. So for every single gallon that you have of fuel in the Arctic or in the AFRICOM AOR, it took 10 gallons to get it there. That's pretty significant.
Good
And of course,
gracious.
yes. One common number that we see floating around for one of the most remote fuel drops that we had, I believe it was in Afghanistan, was $400 for a barrel of oil. So if you're going really out into the field, you can see significant costs. For the Middle East AOR, we were looking at, and this was also relevant to the time too, so you'd have to adjust it for inflation for today, but approximately $42 or thereabouts for every gallon of fuel. Today, that's equal to around $62 to $63 per gallon of fuel. So for us, if we can reduce the amount of fuel that's needed, not only are we potentially saving lives by reducing the number of humans involved in resupply or the number of resupplies that we're conducting, we can also significantly reduce the cost burden. For the recent operation that we had in Florida, this translated directly to saving about $1,000 per day in fuel costs.
Now, I mean, we've had several podcast topics in the operational energy realm, right? That general topic, but you can start. The more we do these, the more conversations we have, the more I understand. I think the more the audience can understand. It's not just, like I said, the energy demands, but it really does affect that. It's a dollars and cents, and most important, lives saved and lives protected. So
For sure.
So to tackle these challenges, these power challenges, your team has partnered with an industry partner, Lima. Instead of a traditional contract, you use what's called an OTA or other transaction agreement. How did that specific approach change the timeline and the way you are developing? And what I failed to do is kind of explain the project that you are working with Lima on. How did this particular technology and that contract process develop this so quickly?
Sure. So we began this project for FY23. And we started with 2 different tasks with Lima. And to go back to your original question, how the OTA differs from the FAR is using the OTA, it's more of a collaborative process. So we have worked with Lima from the beginning to develop the parameters of the projects and provide consistent feedback throughout. Now, of course, we can't direct them on what to do, but we can provide them insight into the military mindset per se, what it is that we need in order to make a project or a technology successful within the military environment or the operational environment for us. So, and if it's convenient, I can give a little bit of a background as to exactly what these projects
Yeah,
are.
absolutely. Yeah, please.
Sure. So we have what we refer to as tasks, several tasks, and each one is a different initiative with Lima to solve a different problem. We currently have 4 different tasks, and how the OTA has differed from the FAR is that for each one of these tasks, like I said, we help them establish the original parameters and specs of the technology, and then we have sent each prototype back and forth. So for example, on our initial task or task 1, in the lab, we have developed a new version of that technology every year. And it has gone back and forth between Lima, like physically gone back and forth between Lima and ourselves over at Searle to provide feedback, to provide Warfighter insight, and then those insights and that feedback is incorporated into the next version. So we are currently on our 3rd and final version of the original task 1 that we started in FY23, and that is going to be transitioned this year.
And what exactly is that?
Sure. It is this particular system, and so when we call a system, it involves the batteries, the solar trackers themselves, And in this particular case, it is 8 trackers make up a singular system along with the battery enclosure. This particular system can also integrate with the AMPS generator, which is the Army Program of Record genset. So for this particular, and this is also what we had in Florida. So we tested it in Florida. We had significant success. We only needed to set up half of the trackers that the system came with in order to meet the demand during the day. And then that system is going to be transitioned down to the Security Cooperative Location, CSL, Camalapa in El Salvador this summer.
So you say trackers, these are solar power trackers that provide in austere environments where there's no infrastructure whatsoever that can, how these trackers, I think you and I had a conversation too, is what kind of power generation capabilities does this particular system provide, Marines, soldiers, sailors in areas? And I may catch you off guard by asking you this, my apologies, but how much power are we talking about generating on these individual trackers? And the tracker, I think you said one time too, is that these are able to follow the sun across the horizon, across the sky, and really maximize the power generating.
Yes. Okay. So these systems perform really well for low constant loads. If you're looking at our tracker, each one can generally output about 2.5 kilowatts. So for this particular use case scenario that we saw in Florida, we were powering 5 different command trailers out on a pier in an operational environment. They're powering everything that you would typically see in, an office environment: laptops, computers, phone chargers. Some of them were also running HVAC because we're in Florida. People want air conditioning, right?
How dare they?
And so that equated to, for us, anywhere from 7 to 8.5 kilowatts. Maybe it might spike at 8.5, but the average load was around 8. And so we set up 4 trackers to meet that load. So during the day, the load was entirely met by the Lima system, which was operating in tandem with a battery enclosure. For this particular system, it was using the T6 battery, which is a Humvee battery. So this is a readily available battery that you are going to find anywhere in any military motor pool. Also makes it very easy to ship around the world. So with that in mind, the Lima systems work really well with a low constant, as I mentioned. You can set the battery to run at whatever, or I should say, it integrates with the generator. So you can set the battery percentage. So for us, we set it at 55% before it kicked on the generator, because we wanted to make sure that we had a healthy amount of time if for some reason there was an issue, right? We're running ops. We don't want to be responsible for command trailers going out. So we wanted to give ourselves at least an hour to fix any problems that might have occurred. But you could have it run down to 30 or 20% before the generator kicked on. So in this way, we created a hybrid system that could be customized. And what is nice about the Lima systems, as you mentioned, they do use GPS tracking to follow the sun. We ran a previous study which showed, and of course this is solar, so it is dependent on the weather, but we compared the static panels to our Lima systems at E5L and found an increased efficiency from anywhere from 8 upwards to 55% as far as output goes when comparing static versus dynamic panels. And I should say, of course, it does require some power to have moving panels, right? But that comes off of the system itself. It's a parasitic load and it's relatively low. So with that in mind, the other thing that is really nice is everything can be remotely monitored. So this is particularly nice in Florida because folks were troubleshooting and working through the night. So, anywhere between like 7 and 9 o'clock at night, we made sure everybody was set for the night. We made sure the batteries were powered up, the generator was full, and we went to bed with monitoring the systems on our phone throughout the night, just in case something should happen. And you can access that monitoring anywhere in the world. Our whole team is fairly spread out. I work out of upstate New York. We have trackers all over the place. We have trackers in Minnesota. We have trackers at Fort Leonard Wood. Of course, Searle is located in Champaign, Illinois. When there is an issue with a tracker down at Fort Leonard Wood, it will automatically send out an email to everybody on the distribution list. So I get a notification at any time something's happening, and we all follow up together as a team, which as a lead, I think that's fantastic because it allows oversight without having to be constantly present.
So in the intro, we talked about these technologies and ruggedizing them. And much of the technology that we've talked about just a few minutes ago is off the shelf that has been improved upon through different versions, like you mentioned earlier. What does it mean to ruggedize these systems and make it, I guess, durable enough to operate in these environments?
Sure. So if you're talking about commercial off the shelf, which most folks usually refer to as COTS, a COT system, they're typically designed for industry needs and industry requirements. So for example, for us, industry voltage is different from military voltage. So that's one of the immediate things we typically run into. To ruggedize the equipment would be to modify it to survive the extreme environmental stressors that the military operations often exist in. So high impact, shocks, vibration is another one that we consistently deal with. Extreme temperatures of course, so both hot and cold. Another one that's critical for us when you're talking about extreme cold temperatures, because batteries often don't perform very well in extreme cold temperatures. And then moisture. Um, for example, corrosion from sea salt. Moisture in general can cause corrosion. So all of these could cause commercial or COTS hardware to fail. And the ultimate goal for us is to create a piece of technology that would pass military standard testing for all environmental requirements. And then on top of that, of course, we want to make them lighter. We want to make them easier to use, easier to deploy, faster to deploy. We try to eliminate any specialized training that might be required in order to deploy or operate systems. All of these are taken into account when we work towards ruggedizing a commercial piece of technology.
So on other episodes, we have talked about soldier touch points, and you mentioned Fort Leonard Wood a little bit ago, and we're going to get to that in just a second. But we've talked about soldier touch points and testing and demonstrations where soldiers or Marines or other service members use the technology and provide the feedback and reviews. How important is this process in getting these technologies better and faster, like you mentioned? And what have been some of the improvements or changes made to these systems using that feedback?
Sure. So in particular, I'm very passionate about this concept in particular, because I think that one of the issues we often find is that when we wait to get a soldier touch point after the technology transition has happened, it's very challenging to incorporate that feedback into the technology, right? We've already completed the transition. We often don't have the contracting mechanism or the funding in order to do that. So in this particular situation, just getting these touch points during the innovation process means that we can include that feedback into the technology before the transition has occurred. And which is why we do these different versions of each Lima system before we get to the final deliverable. So as I mentioned earlier, we are on our third version of our task one, and every year we had a new version. Each year that version was tested out and we receive touch points from that. So we start with an initial prototype, which is often tested at EFOB-L, located in Champaign, and that gives researchers access to a prototype. Once it has kind of graduated, so to speak, we can bring it down to CBTech. And CBTech has a fully functioning, full-scale base camp of roughly around 750 individuals. It's fully monitored, metered and monitored. It can give us feedback there as well. And that allows us to get soldier touch points at a larger scale for technologies that are at a higher TRL. So we've gone back and forth with that, and we've made quite a few changes to our systems. So our newest system in relation to the original system. So originally, again, Lima was a commercial solution. It was designed to be a permanent structure. We work in operational environments. Our goal was to take that permanent structure into something that was deployable. Originally, it required a cement anchor to keep it in place. Not possible for us. We worked with them to do a complete redesign of the base. And we have changed everything down to the nuts and bolts. Literally, we just had a meeting and we're changing the material that we're using for nuts and bolts to something that is going to survive our environment and be easier and faster. If you're in a cold environment, trying to screw something tiny in might not work out so well. So we're working with them to modify that. From a weight perspective, the original systems were extremely heavy. We worked with them to cut that weight down. And then our newest system is a further 40% reduction in weight by switching from a steel base to an aluminum base. We're working with the team. Currently, the lightest they have, it's 16 pounds over a 4-man lift. We just had a phone call yesterday to redesign that. We're working on something that can become a 2-person lift. We went from requiring 2 people working for several hours to get one tracker up and going. We got that down to 2 hours. And in Florida, we had it down to 1 hour. So we're consistently working to improve in all of the areas that make something ruggedized in the military.
So now in our world, and as I've become immersed in ERDC over the years, acronyms are fantastic. I think I need a book of acronyms, and you've mentioned a couple today that I want our audience to know about. One of which you mentioned, EFOBL, which is ERDC's Forward Operating Base Laboratory. You said located in Champaign, Illinois, at Searle's headquarters facility there. And the other one is CBTech, which is, and this is a good one. So I understand why we say CBTech all the time. It is the Contingency Basing Integration Training Evaluation Center at Fort Leonard Wood in Missouri. So these 2 facilities, and I've had a chance to visit the EFOBL. It's you can actually put these technologies to test at one at Champaign at Searle, and then beat it up, test it, validate it, whatever, and then you can take another version to CBTech where the soldiers get their actual hands on it. So tell me a little bit about those facilities and how valuable they are, and I think we've alluded to it, but really how valuable they are to what research teams, not just your research team, but others have in being able to, I guess, beat these systems up.
Yeah. So if you are ever a guest at Searle or coming through, you will see our very first Lima system. The company has asked us, hey guys, can you please take that down? It's a little embarrassing at this point. We've come so far. But we're like, hey, this tells the story of how far we have come. It shows people the progress that we have made. Look at where we started. So you'll see quite a few technologies like that at EFOBL. We also have technologies there set up right now from our water team, operational water team. But these locations, as I mentioned earlier, they give us hands-on experience and hands-on touch points, not just with researchers like myself, but particularly at places like CBTech, we can get warfighter touch points. Not everybody has the opportunity or the funding to take their technology to the warfighter, but CBTech often has a number of warfighters coming through. In particular, we often have Prime Power School located or coming through there to do training. And so when they're there, we can kind of pick their brains on feedback. Recently, we have had them set up, or we've had warfighters set up 2 different Lima systems, which are currently powering the lights for 2 different prototype structures. So not only are we getting feedback on the structures themselves for our partners, but we're also getting feedback for ourselves on our Lima systems. And then we're conducting metering and monitoring so we can do long-term testing as well.
So I'm going to just jump ahead a little bit, which is easy for me to say, without getting into operational sensitivities, if there are any. Can you give us some examples of how these systems have performed in the field? I know you mentioned Key West went well, and I know that those systems are are going for further testing or deployment in El Salvador. How are these systems actually doing as far as the jobs they're asked to do?
So and also at Key West, we had no issues there. I think I mentioned. So originally, our preliminary analysis showed a 70% savings in fuel. I strongly think it's going to be closer to 60 in the end because there were folks running so much work overnight, which is equates to an actual operational environment, right? You're going to be running 24 hours a day. So we had no issues in Key West. In other locations, the systems are designed to run up to 3 months without human intervention, or I should say physical intervention. You can remote monitor them, you can reset them remotely. But again, there's prototype technology. So we're just reaching our final end stage for one. The other prototypes perform fairly well. Again, we're working with a company that is headquarters out of Minnesota. And the technology was originally designed to work for agriculture in an area that receives snow. So we're talking bifacial panels. They're designed to collect light and low environment. They're also designed to melt the snow. So if you have snow buildup to melt snow, the movement will slide the snow off of it, continue to collect solar even in a winter or cold environment. And everything is performing fairly well at this point in time. We've had no major issues. The biggest challenges have been, of course, when we move something into the field and we find out that, oh, that thing that we thought was a great idea in the lab is in fact not the best idea in the field. And that leads to a design change. So I guess going back to some of a previous question, other design changes, right? In some cases, we got rid of the nuts and bolts. It's all pins. It opens up like an umbrella. Fewer things for you to lose, faster, overall, a much more simplified system. So again, reducing the kind of burden that it requires as far as training and maintenance. But we have had no issues. And so to go back to what you're saying, Florida in particular, so that is an entirely unclassified event. So when the studies come out, they're available to any researchers who might be interested in them. And that was done very intentionally so that the information gathered here could be shared. But everything has been very promising at this point in time. And again, our goal is to create hybrid systems that reduce the burden of logistical resupply. So we're not looking to move completely away from fuel at this point in time, but we are looking to reduce, I feel like I'm just harping on the same thing over and over again, but it's a critical issue because, again, as I mentioned, it can directly equate to saving lives.
So, based on our conversation today and the previous discussions we've had in the operational energy topic, we're seeing a growing focus and increased research in this area. Why is the demand for these advancements increasing, and how do you, along with your partners in industry, work to meet that increased demand? I think a previous conversation is not to go back to research and in the field. It's good to have those failures in the field, testing and that kind of stuff. But how do you go now to meet this as you transition it, meet the demand that I'm sure is out there, in Army units and Marine units and Navy units and so forth?
Sure. And you're not wrong. We've had a pretty significant demand, particularly with our upcoming products now that we've found success. And we're working to not just streamline the technologies themselves, but develop specific solutions for specific needs. We have had quite a bit of a demand signal across all different AORs there. For us in particular, right, you're releasing a new technology into the field. It's kind of like setting, your kid's first day of school. How's it going to go? And so again, I appreciate the remote monitoring capability because that allows us to keep an eye on things. And of course, because we are ERDC, we're not just letting it go and then you're on your own afterwards. So we do provide support and problem solving, and as does our partner, which has been fantastic of them. We have systems lined up to go. As I mentioned, right, we talked about El Salvador. We're also working with Fort Wainwright to look for energy solutions for them in the extreme cold. We've had demand signal out of Marshall Islands. In particular, we're working to develop a new system that will integrate our solar with the atmospheric water generation system to produce upwards of 100 gallons of water a day in a completely operational environment using only solar power, and the Lima system battery enclosure. So again, we're looking to see, we are getting quite a demand signal at this point in time, as you pointed out. So hopefully that will only lead to better, more efficient, and more effective technologies.
So my last question, and you kind of alluded to it, my kid's first day of school, at ERDC, many people on the podcast have said that, it's not, we don't keep it here. We want to get it to the people, to those who need it fast as possible. As someone who has been in research for several years and throughout your career, how does it feel to be at a point where you're actually having that research component now being fielded, deployed, and being useful to men and women around the world?
Well, for me, it's one of the reasons why I love this job and why I love working for the Corps. So many times in our lives, I think we often wonder, like, what am I doing this for? Am I actually accomplishing anything here? And I think that this job in particular, and, being on this team allows us to see exactly what we're doing this for. And you get feedback from the folks who you're impacting. Sometimes it's good, sometimes it's helpful.
I like that. Good and helpful. I like that one.
Yes, those are our two options here. But I find it particularly rewarding. So maybe that's on me. Maybe I just don't have the patience. But it provides me with some immediate satisfaction. And I've been particularly proud of the fact that we were able to take this project from conception in FY 2023 to delivery this year, which I think is a fairly quick turnaround for a transition. It is very rewarding, I think. And I think that I can say a lot of my team members feel the same way.
Well, listen, I appreciate the time. I appreciate you doing this episode so soon after coming back from Key West and excuse me, and getting caught back up. Many of the information you've shared today will be included on our website, poweroferdictpodcast.org. We'll have photos from the Key West testing up there, as well as a link to an article by your friend and mine, Sarah Clark, who from our public affairs office, who wrote an article about some of the work you're doing with Lima. We'll include a link to that as well. And we'll have other links to the research on those pages. So if you have more questions or want more information, you can email to our audience. You can email ERDC at usace.army.mil, and we will have more information available to you as well. So for that, I say thank you, Dr. Lyons, for joining us, and to our audience, thank you for being here as well. To that, we'll see you next time.